So welcome and thank you all for coming to today's panel, Surveillance in a Security Concerned Society. My name is Amelia Wirtz, and I'm a joint PhD JD student here. I'm studying philosophy and law, and I'm also an academic law fellow at the Clough Center. And today, you guys have the honor of being at one of the events every year that the graduate students in the Clough Center plan. And so we selected this topic and went out and found just some of the best people to talk about it that we could find. And so that's really how we got to this panel today. And I just want to thank particularly Scott Resnick and Lauren Diamond Brown and Gary Winslet, who really spearheaded this panel. And yay! And I also want to thank some of the Clough administrative staff, Stephanie Quertzoli and Diane Bemis. And also, of course, we always thank Mr. Clough, Mr. and Mrs. Clough, when we have Clough Center events, because they have given us just many great opportunities with amazing speakers and events every year. And this event is no different. We have 3 amazing speakers lined up for you today. First, we have Dr. Torin Monahan, who's a professor of communication studies at the University of North Carolina. He's published over 40 articles and book chapters and 5 books. And his most recent book, Surveillance in the Time of Insecurity, won the Surveillance Studies Book Prize. He also has several other books on surveillance, and he is an associate editor of the leading academic journal on surveillance called Surveillance and Society. Our second speaker will be Professor Shaun Spencer, who's a professor of law and the director of legal skills at the University of Massachusetts Law School. He previously taught at Boston College Law School and at Harvard and practiced law in the private sector. He's published a number of articles on legal aspects of privacy and surveillance, including the surveillance, silence, and third-party privacy problems. And our final speaker is Dr. David Rosen. He's a professor of English at Trinity College, and he recently co-authored a book entitled The Watchman in Pieces, Surveillance, Literature, and Liberal Personhood. The Watchman has won several prizes, including The Watchman in Pieces won the Modern Language Association's James Lowell Prize. He's also co-authored several articles on surveillance from a literary perspective. So let's go ahead and get started. So we'll welcome Dr. Torin Monahan.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and to the organizers for putting this together. It's a pleasure to be here. The title of my talk is going to be Google for Police, Surveillance Operations at Homeland Security Fusion Centers. And I want to begin my talk with the observation that information societies are surveillance societies. Our technologies, from our cell phones to our credit cards to our web browsers, are generating and collecting data by default and lending themselves to surveillance uses. So whereas technological surveillance has most often traditionally been equated with police video cameras, people are rapidly coming to realize that our devices are generating vast data trails that allow for data mining and spying by government agencies, private companies, peers, and others. More than that, though, surveillance is one of the organizing logics of modernity. It's perhaps the key way that organizations operate, by amassing data for supposedly rational decision making. So I would assert that an interdisciplinary orientation is ideal for engaging with the issue of surveillance, because technologies, cultures, politics don't fit neatly into any one disciplinary box. Okay, a number of us have been advancing such inquiry through the Surveillance Studies Network, which is an international collective of scholars working in surveillance studies. We publish an online open access journal, peer-reviewed journal, Surveillance and Society. We run an international conference every 2 years. We host workshops for graduate students, and we generally create opportunities for collaborative and comparative scholarship across disciplines and across countries. Through these efforts, we've expanded the focus beyond more traditional national security issues to think about surveillance in everyday life, think about art, think about games, think about social inequalities, think about the panoply of ways in which we are exposed to and a part of surveillance practices in everything we do. Okay, that said, national security issues persist, and surveillance remains associated with these issues, and it also happens in collaboration with the private sector, as Edward Snowden's revelations about the NSA make clear. So there remains a need to track state surveillance, even as our scholarship becomes more inclusive to thinking about the everyday. What I'd like to present for you today is some material from a project of mine on Department of Homeland Security fusion centers. And fusion centers are counterterrorism organizations that are designed to coordinate data sharing among state and local police, intelligence agencies, and private companies, ostensibly to connect the dots to prevent future terrorist attacks. There are 78 officially designated fusion centers across the country, although there are many private sector ones and others that are not officially designated. What they do concretely, they assist with police investigations, they operate tip hotlines for suspicious activities, they put together suspicious activity reports, and they compile threat assessments for critical infrastructure or for key events such as the Super Bowl or a presidential visit to a city. They'll compile threat assessments in advance. Most of them are housed in police departments, and this is important because not only are they decentralized and therefore difficult to coordinate and also difficult to maintain accountability, but they acquire or they merge with local police cultures in ways that allow them to strengthen ties to address their activities toward the needs of local communities, but also in ways that open them up to the biases and prejudices of local police cultures too. And I'll say a bit more about that near the end. So a word on methods. With support from the National Science Foundation, my collaborator Priscilla Regan and I have conducted 56 semi-structured interviews, predominantly with Fusion Center directors and analysts. We've done site visits to fusion centers as well as to government and industry conferences, and we've done document analysis of government reports and Freedom of Information Request obtained documents. In total, 36 separate fusion centers are represented in our interview sample of the 78, so we're particularly proud of being able to gain that level of access. So here is, to give you a sense, here is an image from the Chicago Fusion Center. You could see that it has some of the classic hallmarks of what we would associate with a surveillance center. It has video surveillance. You have the video walls. Officers can control cameras on the streets. A lot of these sites also can pull up building schematics and are tapped into other forms of smart city planning. So sensors embedded in roadways or chemical and biological agent detection systems in some cities. They also vary radically. That you could have some centers that have maybe 4 employees, others that have upwards to 80 employees. So there's a saying within this community: if you've seen one fusion center, you've seen one fusion center. that they're not standardized in any way. And although it's impressive visually, what they do mostly is rely on abstract data to try to bring about a mode of anticipatory policing called intelligence-led policing. So it's a risk management approach to policing that tries to figure out in advance where crimes are more likely to occur. You have criminal hotspots where terrorist activities are going to happen, and intervene or interrupt in those activities. In practice, what they end up doing is expanding, because there's not a lot of terrorism out there, expanding their mission to encompass all crimes and all hazards, and then you have high-tech counterterrorism equipment being used for basic policing purposes. Okay, I'm going to turn to some quotes from our data now. One of the ideas is to mobilize a network of police, of counterterrorism folks, to fight criminal networks who also have these networks. So it's a competitive jockeying for dominance. One Fusion Center director told us, the best way to counter a criminal network is with a police network. Threats are getting more significant. The only way to counter that is to be smart about it and share information. You know, it's gone beyond, I adjusted my screen and now I can't see. Okay, it's gone beyond the traditional need to know, right to know, to, as you know, the FBI has made clear, to a mindset of need to share. It's recognized that you've got to share information in order to accomplish the goal. And the primary way that information sharing happens is through the embodied presence of analysts, what we think of as embedded analysts, at these Fusion Center sites, where they have access to their respective agency databases, whether they work for the FBI or they work for DHS, they work for Customs and Border Protection. You have these analysts who are not all from the same police department, but are stationed at these places. Their salaries are paid in part by their respective agencies, so there's strange accountability problems that emerge here. But they have access to their respective databases, so you don't need to worry about security clearances. You don't need to worry about permissions. That active fusion happens with people talking to each other in these rooms. Interestingly, sometimes the Fusion Center directors don't have the same kind of clearance that their employees do. So they're not, if they ask questions, they're not given the whole story, and that's a point of frustration for some of them. So it's not entirely seamless sharing. There are rifts. Okay, so that's how it works. An officer explained to us the true benefit is to have those agents from the different agencies sitting next to each other with all their data sets, all their legacy and parent agency data piped right to their desk. You'll have a drug enforcement agency intel analyst sitting next to an immigration and customs enforcement intel analyst, sitting next to a DHS border analyst, and they all have their agency data right at their fingertips. That's the true value of Fusion. And this is just a sampling of some of the agencies that could be present at these sites. You also have FBI, of course, is almost at every single site. They're a key player. Secret Service, National Guard, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, so you have military as well. State-level departments of corrections, highway patrol, anything you could think of depending on the sites, and at some of them private sector analysts from local companies. So that's interesting as well. To what extent do private sector analysts have access to these databases too? We could talk about that. They craft an identity as a one-stop shop for data. And this is getting back to or beginning to reference my title of Google for Police ? Because they want to be the one-stop shop. They want to ensure their continuation, they want to institutionalize themselves so that they're not defunded. And the way they do that is by making themselves invaluable, marketing themselves to police, getting terrorism liaison officers out in the community, trying to get the word out that if you need anything, come to us first. One analyst explained, most Fusion Centers actually bring all those databases under one roof, if you will. We're kind of like a one-stop shop. This recurred in countless interviews. If somebody needs information, we're able to access those databases, so we get requests. I think we had well over 2,000 requests last year for information. And the amount of data that Fusion Centers can access is truly impressive. A sampling of possibilities include welfare and unemployment checks, firearms licenses, car rental information, credit reports, DMV records and photos, employment histories, just about anything you could think of. And if they're unable to access it or collect it themselves because of legal restrictions, they also will tap into private company databases and pay for that service so that they can get access to credit card transactions and things that would be illegal for the police to access otherwise. So there is this blending, this ready blending of information that happens. It's also not limited to counterterrorism. It can be just about anything that they think of. It's also, in a sense, in the cloud. Of course, the cloud resides somewhere materially, but usually not at these sites. One analyst said, "I know people always have this kind of conspiracy theory of what they don't know, but the reality is this is just information." As a science and technology studies scholar, I look at the construction of knowledge all the time. I really appreciate this articulation. It's just information. It's neutral, it's passive, it doesn't do anything. Threats come in, which is reasonable suspicion, probable cause. The information is looked at, so it's linear, watch this. The information is looked at from a number of different perspectives and, classified and unclassified systems. And then it's moved over to a joint terrorism task forces, which disrupt terrorism. We're a channel. We're just a channel. I could have put that in parentheses. So there's this construction here of themselves as passive, disinterested, apolitical, that they just pull together information as requested, pass it on, and discard it. This also, importantly, belies their active construction and collection of information and the interpretive process that goes into this. Like deciding whether something is suspicious or not is an interpretive act. It's not neutral, obvious, self-evident that they're involved in these ways, and I could speak more about that. They also claim, analysts and directors, that the ACLU is perfectly okay with what they're doing because they don't house anything in site, or on site, excuse me. So they're not retaining personal identifiable information. According to our interviews with civil society groups, this is not true. And also there's some evidence, like for instance, the New Mexico ACLU chapter filed an open records request with their fusion center and was told there's no material product to turn over. So it's in the cloud, and we can't give you anything about what our activities are, which is a very effective way of skirting accountability. So Google for police. You have these software systems that are designed to do this and automate some of these functions, the intelligence-led policing functions. For instance, there are a number of them, like Microsoft Fusion Core is one of the key ones that's used. Palantir puts together a package, and this is a quote about I2's CopLink that is used to, quote, instantly detect non-obvious relationships, associations, and patterns to generate actionable investigative leads that will reduce the time it takes to identify and apprehend criminal or terrorist suspects. So the software will just sift through all the data and tell you where you need to go. But then, as my colleagues will remind us, there's the law. And specifically, Title 28, Part 23 of the Code of Federal Regulations requires reasonable suspicion for the collection or storage of information. And that's reasonable suspicion that someone is involved in a criminal or terrorist activity and that the information being requested pertains to that activity. So the dragnet of data to look for something that might be interesting is in tension with the Code of Federal Regulations. You see the same kind of tension with what's happening with discussions of the NSA, wiretapping and surveillance programs. That said, or in addition to that, law enforcement is relaxing some of these standards anyway with their own policies. So for example, the FBI has changed its rules for its agents at Fusion Center sites too, that agents be allowed to search databases without making a record of their decision, especially for quote unquote quick searches. So if you have a hunch, You can look something up. So this is the Google sensibility that I'm trying to say, that police feel frustration that they can't just look things up the way everyone else can when they're not in a fusion center or in a police department. They have access to databases. They should be able to follow their hunches and follow those spidery webs. So these restrictions are being loosened in practice, and then law is accommodating in its own way. However, evidence suggests that quick searches and lengthy ones are inflected by racial, religious, and political bias. So I'll say a few words about that. According to one of our informants, this is a private vendor who sells software to fusion centers. Fusion centers desperately want to go look for young Muslim men. I mean, that's the reality. And the many unprompted examples we got from fusion center analysts and police affirm this interpretation. They want to do things like assist with investigations at mosques. They attempt to identify and keep track of Yemenis, for example, in their neighborhood. They file suspicious activity reports on people, quote, talking on the phone in a foreign language, end quote. And they want to keep track of people who might be sending money to, quote, freaking somewhere in the Middle East, end quote. So these are just quotes that came through as we were conducting interviews, and they're just part of the atmosphere of these places. That said, establishing a threat or a nexus to terrorism, if you want to be official about it, might be easier than you think. So for example, the terrorism indicators reference card put together by the New York Fusion Center includes things like recent travel overseas, has a student visa but is not proficient in English, refusal of maid service at a hotel, owning a GPS unit, or demonstrating unusually calm and detached behavior. So you get a sense that if you were looking for a reason to try to investigate someone, it wouldn't be that hard to latch onto an indicator to support that, the beginnings of that investigation. And we know as well with other programs, so it's not in this talk, but fusion centers were involved with spying on the Occupy Wall Street activists. We now know that clearly. We have that from Freedom of Information request documents and emails. And we know about NYPD's demographics unit that infiltrated communities, spied on mosques, spied on students at universities, especially for radicalization-prone activities like whitewater rafting trips. So they're like, I haven't been on any, I don't know. So let me wrap up. With the example of fusion centers, we see that security organizations adapt to the imperatives of surveillance societies to collect, share, analyze, and act on data. And they feel compelled to be able to do that with the tools available to them, with the same kind of absence of obstacle that the rest of us might encounter with our information systems. So this is part of how organizations are running themselves anyway, not just law enforcement. Those of us at universities know about the importance of data for making decisions. They are somewhat transient in nature too. They respond to requests, they draw temporary patterns, they communicate to others, and then they leave little or no trace. I'm not saying that this is apolitical, there is that interpretive dimension, but they truthfully express some remorse, not remorse, wrong word. Okay, I can't think of the word, but they are bothered by the fact, it's a high point word, they are bothered by the fact that they don't know what happens with the investigations that they've participated on, that they don't know after the fact, did we apprehend someone? So they are severed from that communicative chain and are transient in that way. Additionally, their decentralized positioning as network nodes deflects public awareness. They're not the Total Information Awareness Center that was proposed after 9/11. Instead, they do that work exactly almost, except in a decentralized way, and then they network with each other. So it's difficult to point to them and say, those are the groups we need to be concerned about. And in addition, they're a part of local police departments, so they're even more insulated. They're just part of the functioning of law enforcement. So as a result, they operate within what we think of as zones of opacity that may both invite abuse on one hand and shield them from accountability on the other. So thank you very much.
That was fascinating. I'm so glad I was here for that. So I'd like to start us off today with just a couple of familiar stories. So one of those stories involved the government getting the cooperation without any legal authority to do so of major communications companies to share all of the communications that pass through their hubs with the government. Another involves a whistleblower revealing a secret government surveillance program, which then prompts substantial, widespread public debate, and in fact, the end to the program, at least in part. Those are not, though, the stories pictured here on the slide. Who knows what the top picture is of? It's a little hard to see.
NSA.
It's the NSA headquarters. And the bottom one I think people recognize is Edward Snowden, but here's who the pictures really ought to be. The top one was post-World War II, that's a telegraph operator, Operation Shamrock, where the predecessor to the NSA, the Armed Forces Security Agency, got the cooperation of the three major telegraph operators to give them copies of every telegram incoming and outgoing from the United States. That program started in the 1940s and ended in the 1970s in the midst of the Church Commission, post-Watergate fiasco, study, reform, et cetera, all without any statutory authority. And the bottom one occurred in the 1840s. Giuseppe Mazzini was an Italian exile living in Britain. He discovered and suspected that the British government was was opening his mail. And he figured it out by mailing himself a letter which had some bits of hair and some poppy seeds and some sand in the letter. And when he got it later, he opened it and none of those things were in his letter. So he broke the story. And it was a scandal. There's a quote actually from the London Times, I believe at the time was the paper. They said in 1844, no man's correspondence is safe, no man's confidence can be deemed secure, the secrets of no family, no individual can be guaranteed from reaching the ear of a cabinet minister. So these stories feel very much like what's going on today. And I start there because we've long been a surveillance-concerned society, or societies in this case. But there's a pendulum swing that we see over time, over history. The events occur that get disclosed, there's a public reaction to it, there's some reform, then the next pressing event happens. War breaks out again, a terrorist attack happens again, and the pendulum swings back. And so we need to never forget that we're in the middle of those swings much of the time, and when it's swinging against you, it's really, really hard to get your message out, to be heard. It's just a lot of pressure. So post 9/11, boy, was it hard for privacy advocates to try to make their case. And I was reading something yesterday about the ACLU post 9/11, knowing that it had to look at what was being proposed for the Patriot Act, but really having to stay under the radar and work behind the scenes and not come out and be seen as, you're trying to help the terrorists. So my initial message is we've been here before. But the rest of my message is there's something a little bit new right now. So there's a little disconnect there, but I hope that's okay. My big picture is I'd like to talk about some features of our current framework of surveillance regulation. We have this binary conception of what privacy is, and we have this focus on what's the targeting decision. Who did you target and why? The digital revolution, the explosion of information and technology is destabilizing that framework because of the massive aggregation of data that's possible, and the fusion centers are a great example, and because of the technologies that allow us to surveil everyone, everywhere at the same time if we so choose. And I'd like to talk a bit about how courts are struggling with how do we mediate this disconnect? How do we deal with the destabilization that we see happening to our surveillance regulation, and then propose a couple of solutions to these problems, but also hear your thoughts and your proposals. So, binary conception of privacy, we can start with a man named Roy Olmsted. He originally in the 19-teens was a police officer in Seattle. Prohibition came into effect. He saw that bootlegging was much more profitable than police work, so he became a part-time bootlegger. He was discovered, he was fired, he became a full-time bootlegger, became very, very wealthy, and was known as the good bootlegger. He wouldn't let his crew carry guns. He didn't get involved in drugs or prostitution or gambling, and he made a point of using bonded Canadian liquor, only the good stuff, not stuff that was sort of tainted or polluted. So that was him. He became very wealthy. His second wife was a Londoner who actually worked briefly, I guess, in British intelligence during World War I. So there's a surveillance connection pretty much everywhere you look these days, or back in those days at least. He bought a radio station, and his wife read children's stories at night. And the legend was that encoded in those stories were messages to his crew, but I don't know that that's ever been confirmed as being true or not. It may be just a legend. But it's a good story, even if it's not true. So he's convicted for violating the National Prohibition Act, and he's convicted largely on evidence found from wiretaps. Maybe his wife should have worked for counterintelligence during the war and helped him out fending these things off, but that didn't happen. So, and in fact, he serves prison time. He's later pardoned by FDR. Prohibition is no longer in effect. And the reports are that he actually got his money back. They seized money from him when he was convicted, and they gave it back along with the pardon. So that was, maybe it's good to be the good bootlegger. So what's the case about? The case is about whether the government violated his constitutional rights, his Fourth Amendment rights, by tapping his phone. Chief Justice Taft. Taft is the answer to a trivia question, by the way. Who can guess what that question is? Yes, sir.
Supreme Court, President, and legislative branch?
It only need two of them. You only need Supreme Court and President, but I think you're right. He's the only one to hold both the presidential office and the Chief Justice office. Yeah. So you can now stun your friends at parties. That's okay. That's good. More points. 2 points to you. Taft's holding and the majority's holding is, look, you didn't enter the person's home. And you have no claim, Olmsted the bootlegger, that the protection of your home extends out along the wires that run down the street any more than you have a claim to protection, to an interest in the highways along which those wires run. For the majority, this is